week 5 of Learning with Miss Jones. Today we're going to do a little intro to the brain and talk about how it has developed, how it has changed over time, and how we've learned more about it through history and medical research. So let's dive into it. So in vertebrates, a neural tube forms along the whole dorsal side above the gut near the surface. Keep in mind, this takes place very early on in development, before anything else can really take place. Before we have a heart and everything else, we need to have a brain. Most of that neural tube is going to become the spinal cord. The anterior end expands and develops into the brain. Now, the human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. The advantage of having a brain is mostly for our communication of neurons, so it can fire more rapidly, and we can get those signals back to our brain and perceive what's going on. Now, there are 5 senses that we have, and if you've noticed, most of our major sensory organs are found at the anterior end, up here. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, and your tongue are all found in this area closest to your brain. I'm sure you heard about parts of the brain before, and we're not going to get all into those, but I'm sure you've heard about the medulla oblongata, the cerebellum, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and also your left and right cerebral hemispheres. So as we've mentioned before, when it comes to medical research, some of these things may not have been considered ethical, especially in today's time, but we have learned a lot of information through this brain research. A lot of times they performed autopsies after death, and they would cut into the brain and figure out what was going on, especially based on a patient's case study and their history of it. So there was one guy who could only say the word tan. That was the only word he was ever able to say in his life. So of course he was a very interesting case to study. When they cut up in his brain, they discovered a single large tumor damaging the lower left side of his brain, and they figured that that side is involved with speech. Now that's considered to be Broca's area, or the speech part of the brain. One of the most interesting case studies was Phineas Gage back in 1848. He was a railway worker that suffered an accident where an explosive caused a large metal rod to pass through his left cheek, into his brain, and out of his skull. Of course, he was immediately blinded in his left eye. They think he may have never lost consciousness. Can you imagine? He told a doctor that day, "Here's enough business for you." To be able still to communicate that day and may have never lost consciousness and to recover from it made it history's most famous case of somebody suffering from brain injury that's significant or severe during that time. Based on some research I've done, his story is found in about 2/3 of all the psychology books in the introduction. Why in a psychology book? Because his friends described him as no longer Gage. The brain damage radically and permanently altered his personality and capacity for any social interaction. To this day, is still one of the most famous cases in history when it comes to the brain and dealing with personality disorders. Neurobiologists also use lesion studies. You can get lesions due to tumors, strokes, or accidental damage to your brain. They investigated these lesions during autopsies and related the position of the lesion to the observed changes in the behavior. Some neuroscientists and biologists have studied experimental animals while they were living. They would remove parts of the skull for access to the brain. Your brain doesn't feel any pain. In today's time, some neurosurgery is performed on fully conscious patients. I mean, haven't you seen Grey's Anatomy or some other medical show like The Resident, Chicago Med? It's been on all of them. The effects of local stimulation can be observed when they're fully conscious, as can long-term changes in the animal's temperament and capacities. Of course, there were widespread objections to this. The suffering it could cause the animals, and on top of that, the animal was often sacrificed at the end of the study. But as we all know, the information they gained was very useful, especially for conditions such as epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. Things we're still trying to figure out today. As technology has changed, we've been able to figure out how to look at the brain without having to cut it open. And we do that sometimes using what we call an MRI, which stands for magnetic resonance imaging. MRIs look at the internal structure of the body, anywhere in the body. It's a long process, and you have to stay very still while it's done, but they can see all sorts of problems inside. It's much better and more invasive than an X-ray. There's also something called the fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance imaging. That's when parts of the brain that are activated by a specific thought process can be identified. The active parts of your brain receive increased blood flow, and that's made visible by injecting a harmless dye, so you can see all that interaction taking place inside your brain. If you have watched medical shows, I'm sure you've seen them perform what they call a pupil reflex to assess brain damage. So there are muscles in the iris that control the size of your pupil. They can constrict or dilate depending on how much light is being input into your eye. So what you'll see doctors do, and this can even happen at an annual checkup, they'll shine a bright light into your eye. Those photoreceptive cells perceive the bright light and send signals through your optic nerve to your midbrain. That's going to stimulate the muscle in your iris and cause the pupil to constrict. The whole point of it constricting is to make sure that it reduces the amount of light that's entering the eye so it can protect from any damage that may be taking place. This should happen immediately, and if it doesn't, that could be a sign of brain damage. So on those medical shows, what you typically see is the doctor trying to open up a patient's eye. The light's going to be shown into each eye. If they don't constrict it once, that probably means the medulla oblongata is damaged. This is an example of a pupil reflex test. If all goes well, his pupils should constrict when they open. Open. Great job! Open. No, but look here.
You didn't tell me where to look, you just said open.
If the pupil reflex and other tests of brainstem function repeatedly fail, the patient is said to have suffered brain damage. Sadly, a full recovery is unlikely, but it can happen. Now, the outer layer of our brain is called the cerebral cortex, and it's only 2 to 4 millimeters thick. However, it has 6 distinctive layers when viewed through a microscope, and it processes the most complex tasks in your brain. Now, only mammals have a cerebral cortex, and in humans, it forms a larger proportion of the brain than in any other mammal. What they've noticed over time, based on cranium size, is that the human cerebral cortex have become greatly enlarged during evolution. Most of the surface area is in the folds, kind of like the mitochondria. Your brain is split into left sides and right sides, and we call those our cerebral hemispheres. Signals from your ears pass to the same side of your brain. However, inputs from your skin, muscles, and other internal organs pass it through the spinal cord, and they up and cross the base of the brain. So that means that your left hemisphere is going to receive the impulses from the right side of your body, and vice versa. The impulses in our eyes do the exact same thing. The left side of the field of vision in each eye passes to the right hemisphere. That's what enables the brain to judge distance. You should try this. Close one eye, have somebody throw something at you, and see if you can catch it. It's amazing what that will do. And it's a lot harder than you think. Now, the same thing is true in which side of the brain controls what side of our body. The primary motor cortex in the left hemisphere controls muscles in the right side of the body, and the right side controls muscles in the left side of the body. A stroke or some sort of other brain damage that occurs in the left side of the brain can cause paralysis in the right side of the body and vice versa. A few years ago, my grandpa suffered a stroke. It affected the right side of his body, and he's still able to use it, just not nearly as well. But it lets us know that the left side of his brain was affected. 15 years later, it's still an issue. Again, he can walk, just not very well. He's had to build all that muscle memory back up in the right side of his body. The most important thing you have to learn, if you've learned anything at all today, is energy and your brain. So let's go back to a lesson on cell respiration. Your favorite, right? That's when we take glucose and oxygen and recombine it to make carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. ATP is so important in your bodies each and every day just to be able to breathe, think, and move. The energy release is needed to maintain the resting potential in our neurons and to reestablish it after an action potential has been fired. It's to keep our brain going, to keep sending signals as fast as it possibly can. Due to the billions and billions of neurons that we have, the brain needs much oxygen and glucose to generate the energy by aerobic cell respiration. It's been said that our brain uses less than 10% of the energy consumed. But an adult human brain uses over 20%. You may think you're adults at 18, but your brain is not fully matured until you're 25 years old. After that, it's all downhill from there. And P.S. female brains mature a lot faster than male brains do, obviously. It's an even higher proportion in infants and small children. So the moral of the lesson today is your brain needs energy to operate. That's why it's so important for you guys to eat breakfast to get your day started. Your brain needs fuel. And just to eat, period. You need fuel all throughout the day to keep your body going. Not just physically, but mentally as well. And on top of that, your body needs to stay healthy. So what I'm trying to say is, whatever you do when you get to college, please do not skip meals. You need it. They may be unhealthy meals because they're cheap meals because you're a college student, let's face it. How many college students have that much money? But you need to eat to keep your brain going, all right, to get it charged up. Before a test, whatever else, make sure you eat. Even if it's something small, give your body and brain that energy that it needs to survive. Well, this wraps up Virtual Week 5 of Learning with Miss Jones. I hope you've enjoyed it. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns need to reach out, please feel free to do so. Stay safe, guys. Until then,